She was a plantation heiress who couldn't play piano. The enslaved seamstress had a forbidden gift. Their secret lessons turned to forbidden feelings, risking everything. When he threatens to sell her away, she makes a desperate choice that will tear their world apart. The truth behind the music room door will leave you breathless. You won't believe the sacrifice one makes for the other's freedom. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The summer heat pressed down on Whitlow Plantation like a heavy hand. It was a kind of Georgia heat that made even the wealthiest planters sweat through their fine linens. But inside the grand White House, appearance mattered more than comfort, and Mrs. Eleanor Whitlow insisted on proper decorum at all times. Again and from the beginning, Eleanor Whitlow said, her voice as crisp as her perfectly pressed dress. She stood by the window of the music room, watching her daughter with narrowed eyes. And Whitlow sat at the piano, her back straight as a rod, her fingers trembling slightly above the ivory keys. At 22, she was the picture of Southern beauty, with her honey blonde hair and clear blue eyes. But beneath that perfect exterior was a young woman who'd never been allowed to fail at anything, especially not now, with her future hanging on her ability to play a simple hymn. "Yes, mother," and replied, taking a deep breath. She began to play, and the notes stumbled from her fingers like uncertain children. One wrong note, then another. Her hands shook more with each mistake. Eleanor's sigh cut through the room. "This won't do, and Thomas Avery will be here for dinner on Friday, and your father has made it clear this match must proceed. A planter's daughter who cannot play a simple hymn is an embarrassment," and felt her chest tighten. "I'm trying, mother." "Trying isn't succeeding," Eleanor replied. She glanced at the clock on the mantel. "I have household matters to attend to. Practice until noon. I expect improvement." With that, Eleanor swept from the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, never fully closed, because a proper young lady was never completely alone, even in her own home. As soon as her mother's footsteps faded and slumped forward, pressing her forehead against the cool wood of the piano, tears threatened, but she held them back. Crying wouldn't help, and it would only make her eyes red and swollen. She didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching until a gentle voice spoke from the doorway. "Miss N, I brought the fresh linens for the music room," and straightened immediately, wiping quickly at her eyes. "Come in, Lila." Lila entered the room with quiet grace, a stack of freshly laundered linens in her arms. At 24, she moved with a confidence that came from knowing exactly how to be invisible when necessary. Her dark skin contrasted with the crisp white of her simple dress, the uniform of a house servant at Whitlow Plantation. Her hair was neatly covered with a headscarf, and her eyes were downcast as custom demanded, but there was an intelligence in them that couldn't be dimmed. Just set them on the sideboard, and said, attempting to regain her composure. Lila did as she was told, then hesitated. "Forgive me for speaking out of turn, missin', but I heard the music," and laughed bitterly. "You mean you heard me failing at the music?" Lila kept her eyes down. "Would you like me to leave, miss?" "No," and said quickly, then more softly, "No, please stay. I could use the company, even if it's just to witness my humiliation." Lila moved to fold the old linens, her movements efficient. "It's the timing that's giving you trouble, miss," and looked up in surprise. "You know music?" A small smile touched Lila's lips. "I don't read it, miss, but I hear it. My mama used to sing in the fields, and she taught me to feel the rhythm of my blood." "Well, my blood must not have any rhythm at all," and said, turning back to piano, "And now mother is determined I play perfectly for Thomas Avery, as if my playing will somehow convince him I'd make a proper wife." Lila continued folding, her eyes now on Ann's hands. "If I may, miss, the problem isn't in your fingers. It's in your counting," and looked at Lila curiously. "What do you mean?" "Music needs a steady count, like a heartbeat," Lila explained. She set down the linens and approached the piano, though she remained a respectful distance away. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ann's eyes widened. "Show me." Lila hesitated, then looked toward the door. "I shouldn't, miss." "Please," and said, "Mother won't be back for hours, and no one else comes to this part of the house in the morning. After a moment's hesitation, Lila stepped closer to the piano. Start again, miss, and I'll count for you, and positioned her fingers and began to play. As the first notes faltered, Lila's soft voice started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice was steady, like a gentle heartbeat, and tried to follow, but her fingers tangled on a difficult chord. She stopped, frustrated. Don't stop, miss, Lila encouraged. Keep going even if you make a mistake. The rhythm matters more than perfect notes. And began again, and this time when she reached the difficult passage, Lila stepped closer. Then, without warning, Lila gently placed her hand over Anne's, and froze at the touch, not because it was improper, though it certainly was, but because of the immediate calm that spread through her at the contact. Like this, Lila said softly, guiding Anne's fingers. 1, 2. Together, they pressed the keys, and the chord rang out, clear and true for the first time, and looked up at Lila in wonder. How did you do that? I didn't do anything, miss. It was your fingers playing the notes. I just helped you find a rhythm. They both became aware of their position at the same moment. Lila's hand covering Anne's, their bodies close enough that Anne could feel the warmth of Lila's presence. It was crossing a boundary that both women knew existed but had never acknowledged. Lila quickly stepped back, returning to the linens. Forgive me, miss. I shouldn't have touched you. No, and said quickly. It was helpful, truly. She paused and added, would you count for me again, just while I practice? Lila glanced at the door, then gave a small nod. If you like, miss, for the next hour, and played while Lila counted quietly, sometimes nodding in encouragement, sometimes shaking her head when in rush to passage. They maintained their distance, but something had shifted between them. A connection formed to the steady count of 1, 2, 3, 4, as the clock neared noon, and finally played to him from beginning to end without a major mistake. It wasn't perfect, but it was recognizable. That was much better, miss, Lila said, gathering the old linens. Thanks to you, and replied with a genuine smile. Aye. She stopped as a shadow crossed the doorway. Both women turned to see Thomas Avery standing there, his tall frame filling the entrance. At 28, he was considered one of the most eligible bachelors in the county, handsome, wealthy, and from one of the oldest families in Georgia. His dark hair was perfectly combed, and his suit was impeccable despite the heat. Miss Whitlow, he said with a slight bow, I hope I'm not interrupting, and quickly stood from the piano bench. Mr. Avery, we weren't expecting you until Friday. I had business nearby and thought I'd pay my respects, he said, his eyes moving from him to Lila, who had immediately lowered her gaze to the floor. I didn't realize you were occupied. I was just practicing, and explained. Lila was bringing fresh linens for the music room. Thomas's eyes lingered on Lila for a moment too long. Indeed. He turned his attention back to Anne. Your playing has improved since my last visit. I'm impressed. Thank you, and said, try to ignore the way his gaze had assessed Lila. I've been practicing diligently. It shows, Thomas said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Perhaps you'll play for me on Friday night. Of course, and replied, her hands clasping nervously in front of her. Thomas nodded toward Lila. You may go. Lila kept her eyes down. Yes, sir. She curtsied slightly to Anne. Mississippi. As Lila left the room, Thomas stepped inside, closing the door partially behind him. Enough for propriety, but just barely. Your mother tells me preparations for dinner on Friday are well underway, he said, moving closer to Anne. Yes. She's very excited for your visit, and replied, taking a small step back. And you, Miss Whitlow, are you excited for my visit? His voice had dropped lower, more intimate, and forced a smile. Of course, Mr. Avery. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I've made no secret of my admiration for you, and your father and I have had several productive conversations about our future, and felt a chill despite the summer heat. My father is a wise businessman. Indeed he is, Thomas agreed, and he recognizes the advantages of joining our families. He stepped closer. As do I, and could smell his cologne, expensive and heavy. She thought suddenly of Lila's scent, clean cotton and a hint of lavender from the linens. I should find my mother and let her know you're here, and said, gently extracting her hand from his. Thomas's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, but before you go, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box, a token of my esteem, and took the box reluctantly and opened it to find a delicate gold bracelet with a small pearl clasp. It's beautiful, she said automatically. Not as beautiful as its intended wearer, Thomas replied smoothly. May I? He took the bracelet from the box and fastened it around Anne's wrist. His fingers lingered on her skin a moment too long. There, he said. Perfect. And pulled her wrist back, smiling politely. Thank you, Mr. Avery. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really should find my mother. Of course, he said, stepping aside. I'll look forward to dinner on Friday. And nodded and hurried from the room, the bracelet feeling like a shackle on her wrist. That evening, after dinner, and sat in her bedroom while Mary, the young housemaid, brushed her hair. From her window, she could see the small cabins where the enslaved workers lived. Light flickered in some windows, candles burning late into the night. That's enough, Mary, and said, You can go. Yes, Miss N. Good night. After Mary left, and sat at her window for a long time, thinking about the day, about Lila's hand over hers, guiding her fingers across the piano keys, about Thomas Avery's possessive gaze. She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist and slowly removed it, placing it in her jewelry box. Then she made a decision. The next morning, and rose early and went to music room before breakfast. As she'd hoped, Lila was there, dusting the furniture. Lila, and said, closing the door partway behind her. Lila straightened immediately. Good morning, Miss N. I need your help, and said without preamble. Mother has scheduled a recital for Friday night, after dinner. I'm to play for Thomas Avery and his parents. Lila's expression remained neutral. I see. I can't do it without your help, and continued. Will you teach me? Like yesterday? Lila looked at the partially open door. Miss, and I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Please, and said, no one will know. We can practice in the mornings before Mother wakes, and perhaps in the evenings after dinner. Lila hesitated, her hands twisting the dusting cloth. The overseer checks the cabins at night. Then we'll meet after everyone is asleep, and said, determination in her voice. Say at 10 o'clock? The household will be settled by then. Miss, and if we were caught, we won't be, and insisted. Please, Lila, I can't fail at this. Not with what's at stake. Lila looked at Anne for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in her mind. Finally, she nodded. On one condition, miss. Anything. We locked the music room door. Anne's eyes widened slightly. Locking a door with a male visitor would be scandalous. Locking a door with an enslaved woman was unheard of. Agreed, and said without hesitation. Tonight, then, Lila said, after the house is quiet, at precisely 10 o'clock that night, and slipped from her bedroom in her dressing gown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The house was dark and quiet, with only the occasional creak of settling wood to break the silence. She made her way down the back staircase, avoiding the third step that always squeaked, and moved silently through the hallways until she reached the music room. Lila was already there, standing by the window. She wore the same simple dress she'd worn during the day, but her headscarf was gone, revealing her hair pulled back in a tight bun. You came? And whispered, relief in her voice. Lila nodded. We should lock the door, miss. And turned the key in the lock, the click seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. For a moment, both women stood looking at each other, the reality of what they were doing, breaking rules, crossing boundaries, hanging between them. Shall we begin? Lila finally asked, and moved the piano and sat down. Lila remained standing a few feet away. The first thing, miss, is to relax your hands, Lila instructed. They're too tight on the keys. And try to loosen her grip, but her fingers remained stiff. "May I?" Lila asked, gesturing toward Anne's hands. Anne nodded, and Lila stepped forward, gently taking Anne's hands in hers. Her touch was warm and sure as she massaged Anne's fingers, working the tension from them. "My mama used to do this with my grandmother when her hands ached from sewing," Lila explained softly. "You need to let the music flow through your fingers, not force it." And watched Lila's face as she worked, noticing the concentration in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips as she spoke. It struck, and that she'd never really looked at Lila before. Truly looked at her as a person, not just as someone who performed tasks around the house. "There," Lila said, releasing Anne's hands. "Now try." And placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The difference was subtle but immediate. Her hands moved more freely, though she still struggled with the timing. "Better," Lila said, "but you're still rushing. Here." She stepped behind and placed her hands on Anne's shoulders. "Feel my breathing. In for 4 counts, out for 4 counts." And became acutely aware of Lila standing behind her, of the gentle pressure of her hands, of the rhythm of her breathing. She tried to match it, her own breath slowing to Lila's steady pace. "Now play," Lila instructed softly, "and breathe with me," and began to hum again, this time focusing on Lila's breath, letting it guide her tempo. The notes flowed more evenly, though still not perfectly. Again, Lila said, "And this time, think of the music as a story you're telling. What does this song mean to you?" And frowned. "It's just a hymn, Lila, about heaven and salvation." "No song is just anything, miss," Lila replied. "Every piece of music tells a story. What's yours?" And thought for a moment, then began to play again. This time, she imagined the notes as a conversation, between her and Lila, between her heart and her duty, between the person she was and the person she was expected to be. The music changed, becoming more fluid, more expressive. When she finished, she looked up at Lila in surprise. "That was..." and began. "That was music." Lila finished for her, a small smile on her lips. "You found your story." They continued practicing for another hour, Lila sometimes counting for her and sometimes standing behind her with hands on her shoulders to guide her breathing, sometimes simply listening and offering suggestions. Near the end of their session, and was playing a simple 4-note sequence that had been giving her trouble when Lila said, "That sounds like home to me," and stopped playing. "What do you mean?" "Those 4 notes," Lila explained, humming them softly. "They sound like the word home. Don't you hear it?" And played the notes again, listening. "Home," she said softly and smiled. "Yes, I hear it now." "Let's call it that," Lila suggested. "Your home passage. Whenever you play it, think of someplace safe." And nodded, playing the notes again. "Home," she repeated, and something warm spread through her chest. As the clock in the hallway chimed 11, they knew their time was up. "Same time tomorrow night?" and asked as she unlocked the door. Lila nodded. "Yes, miss. But remember, you need to practice during the day as well." "I will," and promised. "And Lila, thank you." Lila's eyes met Anne's, and for a moment, neither woman looked away. "Good night, missin'," Lila finally said and slipped out the door, and stood in the music room for a long moment after Lila left, her fingers tracing the keys where they had played the home motif. Then she quietly made her way back to her bedroom, the notes still echoing in her mind. The next morning and practiced diligently. When her mother came to check on her progress, she was pleasantly surprised. "Well, this is an improvement," Eleanor said, watching and play. "Still not perfect, but much better than yesterday. Perhaps you finally decided to apply yourself properly." "Yes, Mother," and replied, carefully maintaining the steady rhythm Lila had taught her. "Thomas Avery was quite taken with you yesterday," Eleanor continued. "He mentioned how lovely you looked at the piano. A well-accomplished lady is essential for a man of his position," and kept her focus on the music, trying not to think about Thomas's assessing gaze. "The bracelet he gave me is beautiful." "Indeed," Eleanor agreed, "and appropriate for a gentleman who intends to court you properly. Your father is very pleased with the match." And hit a wrong note and Eleanor frowned. Concentrate, Anne. Friday's recital must be flawless. The Averys are one of the most influential families in the county, and this marriage would secure our position for generations. Yes, Mother, Anne said, returning to the beginning of the piece. Eleanor watched her for a few more minutes, then nodded with satisfaction. Keep practicing. I have faith you won't disappoint us. After Eleanor left and continued playing, but her mind was elsewhere, on Friday night, after the recital, Thomas would likely make his intentions official. Her father would accept on her behalf. By Christmas, she would be Mrs. Thomas Avery, mistress of Avery Plantation, responsible for running a household even larger than Whitlow. It was what she had been raised for, what was expected of her. So, why did the thought fill her with such dread? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Mary, the young housemaid, enter the room until the girl spoke. "Excuse me, missin'. Your mother asks if you'll join her for tea in the parlor. Mrs. Caldwell and her daughters have come to call," and sighed. "Tell Mother I'll be there directly." As Mary turned to leave, she hesitated. "Miss Anne?" "Yes. I heard you playing just now. It was real pretty." Anne smiled. "Thank you, Mary." After Mary left, and played the home motif once more, letting the 4 simple notes center her. Then she closed the piano and went to join her mother for tea, already counting the hours until she could meet Lila again. That night, their lesson went even better. Lila had him play while walking around the room, then while sitting perfectly still, teaching her to feel the music in different ways, and found herself laughing more than once at Lila's creative instruction methods. "My fingers don't bend that way," and protested when Lila demonstrated a particular technique. "Yes, they do," Lila insisted. "You're just afraid to try." And to Anne's surprise, when she did try, her fingers cooperated perfectly as they practiced the home motif and asked, "Where is home for you, Lila? I mean, where did you grow up?" Lila's expression became guarded. "Here, miss. I was born on this plantation." "Oh," and said, suddenly embarrassed by her ignorance. "I didn't realize. My mama worked in the big house before me." Lila continued after a moment. "She taught me sewing when I was little, said it would keep me inside where it's cooler," and nodded, unsure what to say. She'd never thought much about the lives of the people enslaved on her father's plantation, where they came from, what they hoped for. "What about you, miss?" Lila asked, changing the subject. "When you play those home notes, where do you think of?" And considered the question. "I don't know. Not here, exactly. More like a feeling, like being safe, being myself." Lila nodded. "That's a good home to have." They practiced for another half hour, and by the end, and could play the entire hymn with only minor mistakes. "You're ready for Friday," Lila said with a smile. "Thanks to you," and replied, "I don't know how to repay you." "No need, miss," Lila said. "Just play your best." As they prepared to part for the night, and impulsively reached out and squeezed Lila's hand. "Thank you. Truly." Lila looked startled, then squeezed back gently before quickly withdrawing her hand. "Good night, Miss Anne," and watched her go, a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't until she was back in her own room that she realized what it was. Friendship. For perhaps the first time in her life, she'd made a real friend, someone who saw her for who she was, not what she represented. The realization should have made her happy. Instead, it filled her with a deep sadness, because in the world they lived in, such a friendship could never be acknowledged, much less celebrated, and fell asleep with a home motif playing in her mind, and dreamed of a place where hands could touch without fear. The next day, and heard whispers among the house staff. Mary was giggling with another maid in the hallway when and passed. "What's so amusing?" and asked. The maids jumped, not having noticed her approach. "Nothing, missin'," Mary said quickly, but her eyes darted guiltily toward the music room. "Mary," and said firmly, "tell me." Mary twisted her apron in her hands. "It's just, Cook says she heard music late last night. Said it must be ghosts playing the piano after everyone's asleep," and felt her heart skip a beat. "And what do you think, Mary?" "I don't believe in ghosts, miss." Mary replied. "But I did hear something last night. Not ghosts, though. It sounded like laughter," and forced a casual smile. "How strange. Perhaps the wind and the curtains. Now I have practicing to do." She hurried to the music room, her mind racing. They had been heard, not discovered, not yet, but heard. They would need to be more careful tonight. But when Lila came to dust the music room later that morning, her expression was troubled. "We have a problem, miss," she said quietly, after checking that they were alone. The overseer started making extra rounds at night, checking the cabins twice. "Can you still come?" and asked, anxiety clear in her voice. Lila hesitated. "It's dangerous, Miss N, for both of us, but especially for me," and knew she was right. If Lila were caught out of her cabin at night, the consequences would be severe. But the recital was tomorrow, and Anne wasn't confident she could play perfectly without Lila's guidance. "One more night," and pleaded. "Just tonight. I need one more lesson before tomorrow." Lila looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "One more night, but we must be extra careful." "We will be," and promised. "No laughing this time." A small smile touched Lila's lips. "No promises, miss. You did look funny trying that finger stretch." Despite her anxiety, and found herself smiling back. "Tonight, then. Same time." Lila nodded and returned to her dusting. But the worry didn't leave her eyes. As in practice through the day, she couldn't help but notice the way the house seemed to be filling with whispers. The maids giggling in corners, the butler giving her curious glances, even her mother commenting on Anne's newfound dedication to her music. The house was beginning to whisper, and Anne wasn't sure how long their secret would remain their own. That evening, dinner at Whitlow Plantation was more tense than usual. Anne's father, James Whitlow, had returned from a business trip to Savannah and was full of news about cotton prices and political rumblings from the North. But Anne barely heard a word, her mind on the upcoming recital and her midnight meeting with Lila. "And," her father said sharply, pulling her from her thoughts, "have you heard a word I've said?" "I'm sorry, father," Anne replied quickly. "I was thinking about my recital tomorrow." Eleanor Whitlow gave her daughter an approving nod, and has been practicing diligently. "I believe she's finally taking her responsibilities seriously." James Whitlow harumphed and returned to his meal. "Good. Thomas Avery is not a man to be trifled with. His family controls half the shipping out of Savannah, and his plantation adjoins ours to the south," Eleanor added. "The combined properties would make the largest holding in the county," and pushed her food around her plate. "Is that all that matters? Property and position?" Her parents stared at her, as if she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "What else would matter?" her father asked, genuinely puzzled. "Family legacy is everything, and the Whitlows have built this plantation over 3 generations. It's our duty to secure its future and yours." "I understand, father," Anne said quietly. "See that you do," James replied. "Now, tell me about this recital. What will you be playing?" As Anne described to him she'd be performing, she couldn't help but think of Lila's hands guiding hers, of the home motif they created together. None of that could be shared with her parents. They would never understand. After dinner, Anne retired to her room early, claiming she needed rest before her big day tomorrow. In reality, she was counting the minutes until 10 o'clock when she could slip away to the music room. At precisely 10, Anne made her way through the darkened house. This time, she was even more cautious, pausing at every creak and shadow. The whispers Mary had mentioned had made her paranoid. When she reached the music room, she was relieved to find Lila already waiting. "I wasn't sure you'd come," and whispered as she locked the door behind her. "I said I would," Lila replied simply. There were dark circles under her eyes, and Anne realized Lila must be exhausted from her regular duties plus these late-night lessons. "Are you all right?" and asked, concerned. Lila nodded. "Just tired, miss. Let's make the most of tonight." They got straight to work. Lila had and played the entire piece 3 times, making small corrections to her technique. "You're rushing the home section," Lila pointed out during the 3rd run-through. "Remember to breathe." and nodded and started again, focusing on the rhythm. This time, Lila stood behind her, placing her hands lightly on and shoulders to guide her breathing. The touch was comforting, and then found herself leaning back slightly into Lila's steady presence. The music flowed more smoothly, and when she finished, she looked up at Lila with a smile. "Better?" she asked. "Much better," Lila confirmed. "You'll do fine tomorrow." "Thanks to you," and said, turning on the bench to face Lila. I wish I could tell everyone it was you who taught me." A sad smile touched Lila's lips. "That wouldn't do either of us any good, miss." And sighed, knowing she was right. "Still, I want to give you something. To say thank you. That's not necessary." "Please," and insisted. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a blue silk ribbon. "It's not much, but I thought, for your hair maybe, when you're not working." Lila looked at the ribbon, then back at and, "Miss, and I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because it would be noticed," Lila explained gently. "House slaves don't wear blue silk ribbons." And felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I didn't think of that." "It's a kind thought," Lila said softly, "but you keep it safe," and nodded, tucking the ribbon back into her pocket. "Sometimes I hate this world we live in." Lila's expression grew serious. "Be careful saying things like that, missin', even to me." They looked at each other for a long moment, and something shifted in the air between them, and became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the way Lila's eyes seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. "I should go," Lila said, breaking the moment. "It's getting late." "One more time through the piece?" And asked, "For luck?" Lila hesitated, then nodded, "One more time," and turned back to the piano and began to play. This time, Lila didn't offer corrections or count the rhythm. She simply listened, her presence a steady support behind, and when and reached the home motif, she played it with special care, tried to infuse the notes with everything she couldn't say. The 4 simple notes hung in the air between them, like a question neither dared to ask. As the final chord faded, and turned to find Lila watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "That was perfect," Lila said softly. "It didn't feel perfect," and replied. "It felt real." "Real is better than perfect," Lila said. She stepped back, creating distance between them. "Good night, Miss Anne, and good luck tomorrow." "Good night, Lila," and whispered, "And thank you for everything." After Lila left, and sat alone in the music room for a few minutes, playing the home motif over and over, trying to hold on to the feeling of connection it gave her. Finally, she made her way back to her bedroom, the blue ribbon still in her pocket, the next morning, and woke to find the house in a flurry of activity. The Averys would be arriving at 6 for dinner, with the recital to follow. Eleanor Whitlow was supervising everything personally, from the polishing of the silver to the arrangement of flowers in the parlor. "And there you are," Eleanor said when it came down for breakfast. "You're to practice for 1 hour this morning, then rest. I want you fresh for tonight." "Yes, Mother," and replied obediently. "And Mary will help you dress it for. I've laid out your blue silk gown, the one with the lace trim. It brings out your eyes." And nodded, accepting a cup of tea from the butler. "Has Lila finished my alterations?" "Yes, the seamstress completed them yesterday." Eleanor confirmed. "The dress will be perfect, as will you." Eleanor hurried off to oversee the preparation of the dining room, leaving and to her breakfast. She ate quickly, eager to get to the music room, not to practice. She felt as ready as she would ever be, but in hopes of seeing Lila. But when she reached the music room, it was empty, and practiced dutifully for an hour, then went in search of Lila. She found Mary instead, dusting in the hallway. "Mary, have you seen Lila today?" and asked casually. Mary nodded. "Yes, miss. She's in the sewing room, working on some last-minute repairs to the tablecloth for tonight." "Thank you," and said, and headed toward the sewing room. She found Lila bent over a large white tablecloth, her needle moving swiftly to repair a small tear in the delicate fabric. She looked up when it entered, then quickly lowered her eyes. "Miss, and She acknowledged formally. Did you need something? And was taken aback by Lila's formal tone, but then noticed another enslaved woman working in the corner of the room. They weren't alone. I just wanted to check on my blue gown, and said, adopting the same formal tone. Mother said the alterations are complete? Yes, miss, Lila replied, not looking up from her work. It's ready for tonight. Thank you, and said. She hesitated, wanted to say more, but unable to with the other woman present. I'm sure it will be perfect. Lila's hand stilled for just a moment, and her eyes flicked up to meet Anne's. Not perfect, miss, she said softly, but real, and felt a rush of warmth at the reference to their conversation the night before. That's all I can hope for, she replied, her voice equally soft. Then, aware of the curious glance in the other woman, and straightened her shoulders and said more loudly, Please have it sent to my room by 3 o'clock. Yes, miss, Lila replied, returning to her stitching, and left the sewing room, her heart lighter. Even in their formal exchange, they had managed to share a moment of connection. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. By 5 o'clock, and was dressed in her blue silk gown, her hair arranged in an elegant style with pearl pins catching the light. She stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the poised young lady who looked back at her. You look beautiful, missin', Mary said as she made final adjustments to the gown. Thank you, Mary, and replied absently, her mind on the evening ahead, on the recital, on Thomas Avery, on the future that seemed to be rushing toward her like a runaway carriage. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mary opened it to reveal Lila, standing with a small sewing basket. Mrs. Whitlow sent me, miss, Lila explained. She was concerned about the hem of your gown. Mary looked confused. I checked the hem, miss. It's perfect, and understood immediately. Mother is very particular, Mary. Let Lila check it again. You can go help in the kitchen. Mary curtsied and left, closing the door behind her. As soon as they were alone, Lila set down the sewing basket and approached Anne. I wanted to wish you luck, she said softly, and to check if you needed anything before tonight. Just courage, and replied with a nervous smile. I'm terrified I'll forget everything when I sit at that piano. You won't, Lila assured her. Just remember to breathe, and when you get to our home passage, think of... She hesitated. Think of you, and finish for her. Standing behind me, counting the rhythm. Their eyes met, and Anne felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. On impulse, she reached into her jewelry box and pulled out the blue silk ribbon. I want you to have this, she said. Not to wear. I understand why you can't. But to keep, as a reminder. Lila looked at the ribbon, then back at Anne. Miss Anne, Please, and insisted, hide it somewhere safe. But keep it. After a moment's hesitation, Lila took the ribbon and quickly tucked it into her pocket. Thank you, she whispered. Another knock at the door made them both jump. Missin', called Eleanor's voice. Are you ready? The Averys have arrived. Coming, mother. And called back. She turned to Lila one last time. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Lila said with a small smile. You have music. The dining room gleamed with silver and crystal, candles casting a warm glow over the elegant table, and sat beside Thomas Avery, making polite conversation while her stomach twisted with nerves. Thomas was impeccably dressed in a black tailcoat, his dark hair styled to perfection. He played the role of attentive suitor flawlessly, complimenting the food, laughing at James Whitlow's jokes, and occasionally leaning close to and offer a private comment. You look especially lovely tonight, he murmured during the second course. That shade of blue suits you. Thank you, and replied with a practiced smile. You're very kind. Thomas's parents, Richard and Victoria Avery, sat across from them, watching their interaction with approving eyes. Victoria Avery was a formidable woman, her gray hair arranged in an elaborate style, diamonds glittering at her throat. Richard Avery was tall and imposing, with the same dark eyes as his son, but colder. And, Victoria said, drawing her attention, Thomas tells me you're quite accomplished at the piano. We're looking forward to your performance after dinner. I hope I won't disappoint you, and replied modestly. I'm sure you won't, Thomas said, placing his hand over hers on the table. I've heard you practice. You play beautifully, and felt a chill at his words. When had he heard her practice? Had he been watching her without her knowledge? She gently extracted her hand from his. You're too generous, Mr. Avery. Thomas, he corrected. Surely we know each other well enough for first names by now. Before and could respond, Eleanor smoothly changed the subject. Richard, James was telling me about your new shipping venture. How exciting to be expanding to Europe. The conversation shifted to business, and was grateful for reprieve from Thomas's attention. She glanced around the room, noticing the enslaved servants moving silently around the table, refilling glasses and removing plates. Lila wasn't among them. As a seamstress, she wouldn't be expected to serve at dinner, and wondered where she was if she would hear the recital from somewhere in the house. By the time dessert was served, Anne's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. The recital loomed ahead of her like a mountain to be climbed. Shall we adjourn to the parlor? Eleanor suggested when the last plates had been cleared. Anne can favor us with her music. The group moved to the parlor, where the piano had been positioned to showcase the performer, and sat on the bench, arranged her skirts, and took a deep breath. She began to play, focusing on Lila's lessons, the steady count, the relaxed hands, the story in the music. The first few measures were shaky, but as she settled into the rhythm, her confidence grew. When she reached the home motif, she thought of Lila standing behind her, guiding her breathing. The 4 notes rang out clear and true, and felt a sense of peace wash over her. She finished the piece with only a few minor mistakes, not perfect, but recognizable and pleasant. As the final chord faded, she looked up to see the assembled guests applauding politely. Bravo, Anne, Thomas said, coming to stand beside the piano. You've improved remarkably since I last heard you play. Thank you, Anne replied, her eyes searching the doorway. For just a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing there, Lila, watching from the shadows. But when she looked again, there was no one. Indeed, you play very well, Victoria Avery said. A proper accomplishment for a young lady. Richard Avery nodded in agreement. Music brings refinement to a household. Our Thomas is quite fond of it, though he doesn't play himself. Perhaps it will play for our guests when she's mistress of Avery Plantation, Thomas said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. A hush fell over the parlor. James and Eleanor exchanged pleased glances, while the Averys looked on with approval. That's rather presumptuous, Mr. Avery, Anne said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Thomas smiled a confident, almost predatory expression. Is it? I thought my intentions were clear. He turned to James Whitlow. Sir, with your permission, I'd like to formally request your daughter's hand in marriage. James puffed up with pride. You have it, son. Gladly given. Excellent, Thomas said, turning back to Anne. Then it settled, and felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Everything was happening too fast, decisions being made without her input or consent. Don't I have any say in this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The adults looked at her with varying degrees of surprise and disapproval. And Eleanor said sharply, Mind your manners. It's all right, Thomas said smoothly. The lady is simply overcome. He took Anne's hand and raised it to his lips. Aren't you, my dear? And wanted to pull away, to scream that she was not overcome, that she had not agreed to anything. But the weight of expectation from her parents, from the Averys, from society itself, pressed down on her like a physical force. I need a moment, she managed to say, rising from the piano bench. Please excuse me. She hurried from the room, ignoring her mother's disapproving call. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Miss Anne? She looked up to see Lila approaching with concern in her eyes. Are you all right, miss? Lila asked softly. No, and whispered. They've arranged everything. Thomas Avery just asked my father for my hand, and father agreed, without even consulting me. Lila's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes darkened. I'm sorry, miss. I can't marry him, Lila, Anne said, her voice breaking. "I don't love him. I don't even like him." "Miss N," Lila said gently, "women like you don't marry for love. You marry for family, for property, for position. Is that all I am? Property to be transferred from one man to another?" Lila glanced down the hallway, ensuring they were alone. "You know that's not what I think, but it's how the world works. For both of us, in different ways." And reached for Lila's hand, squeezing it briefly. "I wish things were different." And Eleanor's voice called from the parlor doorway, "What are you doing?" And quickly released Lila's hand. "Just getting some air, Mother. I'll be right back." Eleanor approached, her eyes narrowing as she noticed Lila. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be finishing the mending?" "Yes, ma'am," Lila replied, lowering her eyes. "I was just returning from the linen closet." "Well, get back to your duties," Eleanor ordered. She turned to Anne. "And you need to return to the parlor immediately. Thomas is waiting to finalize the engagement. You've embarrassed us enough for one evening." "Yes, Mother," Anne said automatically, as Eleanor led her back toward the parlor and glanced over her shoulder at Lila, who was walking in the opposite direction. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication passing between them. Then Anne squared her shoulders and returned to the parlor, where Thomas Avery waited with a triumphant smile. Later that night, after the Averys had departed with promises of a formal engagement dinner the following week, and sat at her dressing table while Mary removed the pins from her hair. "Congratulations, Missin'," Mary said cheerfully. "Mr. Avery is so handsome. All the maids are jealous." "Thank you, Mary," and replied mechanically. "An Avery plantation is even grander than this one, they say. You'll be the most important lady in the county." And nodded, her mind elsewhere. After Mary left, she changed into her nightgown and sat by the window, looking out at the dark landscape. In the distance, she could see the faint lights of the cabins where the enslaved workers lived, where Lila lived. A soft knock at her door startled her. Thinking it was her mother coming to discuss the engagement, and reluctantly called, "Come in." But it was Lila who slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. "Lila," and exclaimed in surprise, "What are you doing here? It's dangerous for you to be in this part of the house at night." "I know," Lila said, "but I had to warn you." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "I found this on your nightstand when I came to turn down the bed," and took the paper and unfolded it. Inside was the blue silk ribbon she had given Lila, along with a note in an unfamiliar hand. "Eyes are on you," and felt a chill run down her spine. "Who left this?" "I don't know," Lila said, her voice tense. "But someone knows, Missin', about our lessons, about—" She gestured vaguely between them. "About us," and finished for her. She looked down at the ribbon, then back at Lila. "What do we do?" "We stop," Lila said firmly. "The recital is over. There's no reason for us to meet anymore," and felt a sharp pain in her chest at Lila's words. "But what if I need more lessons? What if—" "Missin'," Lila interrupted gently, "you're engaged now, to be married. This, whatever this is between us, it has to end." "I didn't agree to that engagement," and protested. "My father did." "It doesn't matter," Lila said. "That's how things work in your world." "And what about your world?" and asked, "Don't you get any choice in your life?" A sad smile touched Lila's lips. "You know the answer to that." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their different realities hanging between them. "I should go," Lila finally said. "Dawn comes early." "Wait," and said, reaching for her hand. "The ribbon. Keep it, please, no matter what happens." Lila hesitated, then took the ribbon and tucked it into her pocket again. "Good night, Miss Anne." "Good night, Lila," and whispered as the door closed behind her. She returned to the window, watching as a small figure made its way across the dark grounds toward the cabins. Even after Lila disappeared from view and continued to stare into the night, her heart heavy with unspoken words. The next morning, Anne awoke to find her mother already in her room, laying out dresses for her to review. "The green silk, I think, Eleanor was saying as and sat up in bed. "For the engagement dinner, with grandmother's pearls." Mother, and began about the engagement. "It's perfect," Eleanor interrupted. "The Averys are thrilled, your father is pleased, and you, my dear, will be the envy of every girl in the county. But what if it's not what I want?" And asked. Eleanor looked at her as if she'd suggested the sky was purple. "What you want. And this isn't about what you want. It's about what's best for the family." "Shouldn't my happiness be part of what's best for the family?" Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, her expression softening slightly. "And happiness in marriage comes with time, with shared purpose, with children, with building a life together. It's not about romantic notions from novels." And looked down at her hands, remembering how they had felt with Lila's guidance. "What if I can't love him, Mother?" "Love is a choice," Eleanor said firmly. "And you will choose to be a good wife to Thomas Avery, because that is your duty. Now get up. We have much to do today." After her mother left and dressed slowly, her movements mechanical, she had known all her life that this was her destiny: to marry well, to secure her family's position, to continue the legacy of Whitlow Plantation. Why did it suddenly feel so unbearable? She went through the motions of the day, discussing wedding plans with her mother, receiving callers who had heard the news of her engagement, writing thank-you notes for gifts that had already begun to arrive. Through it all, she kept an eye out for Lila, but the seamstress was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't until late afternoon that, and finally spotted her crossing the entrance hall with a basket of linens. "Lila," and called, hurrying to intercept her. "I haven't seen you all day." Lila kept her eyes downcast. "I've been busy, miss, with the laundry," and frowned. "The laundry? But you're a seamstress." "Mrs. Whitlow reassigned me," Lila explained, her voice neutral, temporarily, and felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Why would she do that? "I couldn't say, miss," Lila replied, but the brief glance she cast toward and spoke volumes. Someone had been watching them. Someone had reported something to Eleanor Whitlow. And now Lila was being punished with the hot, back-breaking work of the laundry. "I'm sorry," and whispered. "Not your fault, miss," Lila said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "Will you be at the engagement dinner next week?" And asked. I'd like to see a friendly face." Lila shook her head. "I'll be in the laundry for at least a week. Maybe longer. Is there anything I can do?" "No, miss," Lila said firmly. "It's better if we keep our distance." And wanted to protest, to insist that she could fix this, but she knew Lila was right. Their friendship, or whatever was between them, had put Lila in danger. The least and could do was respect her wish for distance. "All right," and conceded, "but if you need anything—" "I'll be fine, missin'," Lila assured her. "You focus on your engagement." Before and could respond, Thomas Avery's voice called from the front doorway. "And my dear, I've come to take you for a drive." And turned to see Thomas striding toward her, elegant in a light summer suit, his hat in his hand. When she turned back, Lila was already hurrying away, the basket of linens balanced on her hip. "There you are," Thomas said, reaching for her hand. "You look lovely today." "Thank you," and replied automatically. "I wasn't expecting you." "A fiancé doesn't need an invitation to call on his betrothed," Thomas said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I thought we might take advantage of the fine, whether for a drive around the property, get better acquainted," and wanted to refuse, to claim a headache or prior commitment. But her mother appeared in the doorway of the parlor, beaming at the sight of Thomas. "What a wonderful idea," Eleanor said. "And get your bonnet. The fresh air will do you good." Trapped and forced a smile. "Of course. I'll just be a moment." As she went to fetch her bonnet, she saw Thomas watching Lila's retreating figure, a calculating expression on his face. A chill ran down Anne's spine, though she couldn't have explained why. 20 minutes later, she sat beside Thomas in his elegant carriage as it rolled down the drive of Whitlow Plantation. The day was indeed beautiful, with a clear blue sky and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of magnolias. "I thought we might drive past the boundaries of your father's land," Thomas said as they turned onto the main road, "to show you where our properties meet." Soon it will all be one great estate. How convenient for you," and said before she could stop herself. Thomas gave her a sharp look. "Pardon me?" and forced a light laugh. "I only meant that it's convenient how well our family interests align." "Indeed," Thomas agreed, though his expression remained wary. "It's a fortunate match for both families." They rode in silence for a while, passing fields where enslaved workers bent over cotton plants, overseers on horseback watching their progress, and had seen this sight all her life, but today it struck her differently. She thought of Lila in the laundry sheds, hands raw from hot water and lye soap, and felt sick to her stomach. "You seem distracted," Thomas observed. "Are you unwell?" "Just thoughtful," and replied, "It's a big change becoming engaged." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "I understand it might seem sudden, but I've had my eye on you for some time, and your grace, your beauty, your accomplishments, they make you the perfect choice for my wife." "And what of love?" and asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its wisdom. Thomas laughed, the sound genuinely amused. "Love? My dear, love is for poets and novels. We're discussing a marriage, a partnership between equals to build a legacy." "Equals?" and repeated skeptically. "In our respective spheres, of course," Thomas clarified. "I will manage the business and property. You will manage the household and social obligations. Together, we'll create the most powerful family in coastal Georgia." It was exactly what one had been raised to want, to expect. So why did the prospect fill her with such dread? "And what if I wanted more?" she asked quietly. "What if I wanted to say in the business, or time pursue my own interests?" Thomas's smile didn't falter, but his eyes grew cold. A wife's interest should be her husband's happiness and her children's well-being. Anything else is a distraction from duty. And fell silent, understanding with perfect clarity what her future held. Thomas Avery wanted a beautiful, accomplished ornament to grace his home and bear his children. Nothing more, nothing less. As they approached a bend in the road, Thomas slowed the carriage. "Look there," he said, pointing to where a line of trees marked the property boundary. "That's where Whitlow land ends and Avery land begins. Soon there will be no boundary at all." And looked where he pointed, but her mind was elsewhere, on a small room with a piano, on 4 notes that sounded like home, on hands guiding hers through a difficult passage. "Yes," she said distantly. "No boundaries at all." Thomas gave her a curious look, but didn't comment. Instead, he turned the carriage around and headed back toward Whitlow Plantation. As they approached the house and noticed unusual activity near the laundry sheds, a group of enslaved workers gathered, the overseer gesticulating angrily. "What's happening there?" and asked, pointing. Thomas squinted in that direction. "Looks like trouble with the workers. Nothing for you to concern yourself with." And felt a knot of dread in her stomach. "Please, can we drive closer? I want to see what's going on. Really, and it's not proper for you to." "Please," she insisted, her voice sharper than she intended. Surprised by her vehemence, Thomas reluctantly directed the carriage toward the laundry sheds. As they drew closer, and could see that the overseer, a brutish man named Jenkins, was shouting at a woman who stood with her head bowed, even from a distance, and recognized Lila, stopped the carriage, and commanded, "And this is not our concern," Thomas protested. "Stop the carriage now," and repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. Thomas pulled the horses to a halt, and before he could stop her, and jumped down and hurried toward the confrontation. "What's going on here?" she demanded as she approached. Jenkins turned, surprise quickly replaced by deference when he recognized her. "Miss Whitlow, this ain't no place for you, ma'am." "I asked what's happening," and repeated, her eyes moving to Lila, who kept her gaze fixed on the ground. "Just dealing with some carelessness, miss," Jenkins explained. "This one spilled lye on the good tablecloths. Ruined 3 of 'em." And looked at Lila's hands, noticing for the first time the angry red marks on her palms and fingers, burned from a harsh lye soap. "It was an accident," and said firmly, "and hardly worth all this commotion. Begging your pardon, miss, but your mother gave strict instructions about this one," Jenkins said, jerking his thumb toward Lila. Said she's to be held to account for any mistakes. And felt a surge of anger toward her mother. This was punishment, pure and simple, not for ruined tablecloths, but for daring to help and to teach her, to befriend her. Well, I'm countermanding those instructions, and declared, Lila is needed back in the sewing room. We have an engagement dinner to prepare for, and the linens will need repair. Jenkins hesitated, clearly torn between conflicting orders from two Whitlow women. Missin', Thomas's voice came from behind her. He had followed her from the carriage, and now stood watching the scene with narrowed eyes. This is beneath your concern. Let the overseer handle discipline among the slaves. And turned to him, chin raised. These are my family's servants, Mr. Avery. Until we are married, how they are managed remains my father's decision, and in his absence, mine. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, and turned back to Jenkins. Lila will return to the sewing room immediately. If my mother has questions, she can speak to me. Jenkins nodded reluctantly. Yes, miss. And see that someone tends her hands, and added, she can't sew with burns. Yes, miss. Jenkins repeated, clearly unhappy but unwilling to argue further, and finally allowed herself to look directly at Lila, who raised her eyes briefly. In that quick glance, and saw gratitude, fear, and warning all mixed together. Go on now, and said more gently, get those hands treated. Lila curtsied. Thank you, miss, she murmured, then hurried away toward the main house. As and turned to rejoin Thomas at the carriage, she found him watching her with an unreadable expression. That was quite a display, he commented as he handed her up into the carriage. I don't know what you mean, and replied, adjusting her skirts. I mean, Thomas said as he took a seat beside her, that you seemed unusually concerned about one particular slave. Ann's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. Lila is our best seamstress. It makes no sense to have her working in the laundry, especially with my engagement dinner approaching. Is that all? Thomas asked, his voice deceptively casual as he set the carriage in motion. What else would it be? And countered, meeting his gaze steadily. Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down Ann's spine. Nothing, my dear, he said finally. Nothing at all. But as they drove back to the house, and couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas Avery saw far more than he let on, and that whatever he saw, he didn't like it one bit. That night, unable to sleep, and slipped from her room and made her way to the music room. She didn't expect to find Lila there. It would be too dangerous after the day's events. But she needed the comfort of the piano, of the home motif they had created together. The house was silent as she moved through the hallways. Everyone long since retired for the night. When she reached the music room, she quietly closed the door behind her but didn't lock it. Then she sat at the piano and began to play, her fingers finding the keys without thought. The hymn flowed from her hands, imperfect but heartfelt. When she reached the home section, she played it over and over, each repetition a reminder of Lila's guidance, of the connection they had shared. A soft sound from the doorway made her look up. Lila stood there, her hands bandaged, her eyes wide with surprise. You shouldn't be here, Ann whispered, though her heart leapt at the sight of her. Neither should you, Lila replied, but she entered the room anyway, closing the door behind her. Your hands, Ann said, rising from the piano bench. Are they badly burned? Lila shook her head. The cook put salve on them. They'll heal. I'm so sorry, Ann said. It's my fault. Mother must suspect something about our lessons. It's not your fault, Lila insisted. It's just how things are. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken words. I heard you playing, Lila finally said. Our home passage. And nodded. It comforts me, especially now with everything changing so fast. Lila took a step closer. Thomas Avery was watching me today, after you left. What do you mean? He came to the sewing room, stood in the doorway watching me work. Didn't say anything, just watched, and felt a chill run down her spine. Did he threaten you? He didn't have to, Lila said quietly. His eyes said enough. I won't let him hurt you, and promised fiercely. Lila gave her a sad smile. You can't stop him, missin'. Once you're married, I'll belong to him too. The truth of her words hit, and like a physical blow. If she married Thomas, she wouldn't just be giving herself to a man she didn't love. She'd be giving him power over everyone at Whitlow Plantation, including Lila. I can't do it, and whispered, I can't marry him. You have to, Lila said gently. You have no choice. There's always a choice, and insisted. Even when all the options are terrible, there's still a choice. Lila looked at her for a long moment, then slowly shook her head. Not for people like me, and not for people like you either. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Play for me? Lila finally asked, gesturing toward the piano. One last time, and returned to the piano bench, and Lila stood behind her, just as she had during their lessons. As and began to play, she felt Lila's presence like a warmth at her back, steadying her, guiding her without words or touch. When and reached the home motif, Lila began to hum softly, a harmony to the notes, and played. The sound wrapped around and like an embrace, bringing tears to her eyes. As the final chord faded, and turned on the bench to look up at Lila, their eyes met, and in that moment, everything that couldn't be said hung in the air between them. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, Lila leaned down until her forehead rested against Anne's. They stayed that way for one heartbeat, two, sharing breath, sharing space. Then a sudden crack of thunder broke the spell. They sprang apart as rain began to patter against the windows. A storm, Lila said unnecessarily, stepping back. I should go before it gets worse. Be careful, Anne said. Your hands will heal, Lila finished for her. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. Good night, Miss Anne. Good night, Lila, Anne whispered after Lila left, and remained at the piano, playing the home motif over and over as the storm raged outside, matching the turmoil in her heart. The storm that had begun the night before continued into morning, trapping everyone inside Whitlow Plantation. The heat was oppressive despite the rain, making the air inside the house thick and heavy, and sat in the parlor with her mother, working on needlepoint while Eleanor reviewed menus for the engagement dinner. I think we should serve the duck, not the pheasant, Eleanor was saying. The Averys seemed to enjoy it last time. Whatever you think best, Mother, Anne replied absently, her mind on the previous night, on the music room, on Lila's forehead touching hers for one brief, perfect moment. And, are you listening to me? Eleanor asked sharply. Yes, Mother. Duck, not pheasant. Eleanor set down her papers with a sigh. You seem distracted lately. I hope you're not having second thoughts about the engagement. And kept her eyes on her needlepoint. Would it matter if I were? And Elizabeth Whitlow, Eleanor said, her voice stern. We've been through this. The match with Thomas Avery is perfect in every way. Your father has already begun discussing the merger of our plantation with Avery land. There are contracts being drawn up. So I'm part of a business transaction, and said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. You're securing your future, Eleanor corrected, and the future of this family. Thomas is handsome, wealthy, and from one of the best families in Georgia. Many young ladies will be thrilled to be in your position. Then perhaps he should marry one of them instead. Eleanor's face hardened. That's enough, Anne. This childish resistance ends now. You will marry Thomas Avery in October as planned, and you will do so with a smile on your face and gratitude in your heart. Before Anne could respond, the butler, Harrison, entered the parlor. Excuse me, Mrs. Whitlow, he said with a slight bow. Mr. Avery has arrived. Shall I show him in? Eleanor brightened immediately. Yes, of course, Harrison. And bring tea. Anne's heart sank. The last person she wanted to see today was Thomas Avery. A moment later, Thomas strode into the parlor, impeccably dressed despite the weather. His boots were slightly damp from the short walk from his carriage to the house, but otherwise he looked as polished as ever. Mrs. Whitlow and he greeted them with a bow. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Eleanor assured him. We're delighted to see you. especially on such a dreary day. Please, sit down. Thomas took a seat beside and on the sofa, close enough that their knees nearly touched. I couldn't stay away, he said, his eyes fixed on Anne. Even the storm couldn't keep me from seeing my beautiful fiancée. And forced a smile. How gallant of you. I've brought something for you, Thomas continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. I meant to give this to you at dinner next week, but I couldn't wait. He opened the box to reveal a large diamond ring, the stone catching the dim light and sparkling despite the gloomy day. Oh my, Eleanor exclaimed. It's exquisite. It's been in the Avery family for 3 generations, Thomas explained. My grandmother wore it, and my mother after her. Now it's yours, and... He took the ring from the box and reached for Anne's left hand. She allowed him to slip the ring onto her finger, feeling its weight like a shackle. Thank you, she said, because it was expected. It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as its wearer, Thomas replied smoothly. He turned to Eleanor, Mrs. Whitlow. I wonder if I might have a few moments alone with Anne? I have some matters I'd like to discuss with my future wife. Eleanor smiled indulgently. Of course. I'll go check on the tea. She rose and left the parlor, closing the door most of the way behind her. Enough for propriety, but just barely. As soon as they were alone, Thomas's demeanor changed. The warm smile disappeared, replaced by a calculated assessment as his eyes roved over Anne's face. You seem troubled, my dear, he said. Is something bothering you? Not at all, and lied. Just the weather, perhaps. Thomas reached out and took her hand, his grip firmer than necessary. Are you sure it's not something else? Or someone else? Anne's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Thomas said, his voice dropping lower. I've noticed your unusual interest in that seamstress. Lila, isn't it? She's a valued servant, Anne said carefully. Nothing more. Thomas's grip on her hand tightened slightly. I saw you yesterday at the laundry sheds. The way you rushed to her defense. It was most inappropriate. She was being treated unfairly and insisted, and she's skilled at her work. It made no sense to punish her for an accident. Is that all it was? Thomas asked, his eyes boring into hers. Just concern for a skilled servant? And met his gaze steadily. What else would it be? For a long moment, they stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Thomas released her hand and leaned back slightly. I've spoken with your father, he said, changing tactics. We've decided to move the wedding up, August instead of October, and felt the blood drain from her face. August? But that's only 6 weeks away. I see no reason to wait, Thomas said with a shrug. The contracts will be ready by then, and I'm eager to begin our life together. But the preparations... Your mother assures me they can be completed in time, Thomas interrupted. In fact, she seemed quite pleased with the change. Of course she was, and thought bitterly. Eleanor Whitlow would be thrilled to have her daughter safely married off as quickly as possible, especially as she suspected anything about Anne's feelings for Lila. I see, and said, her mind racing. 6 weeks. She had only 6 weeks of freedom left. There's one other matter, Thomas continued, his tone deceptively casual. After we're married, I think it would be best if we started fresh with our household staff. I'll be bringing my own butler and valet, of course, but I'd like you to select new ladies' maids and housemaids from among our servants at Avery Plantation. And understood immediately what he was saying. He wouldn't allow her to bring any of the Whitlow servants with her, especially not Lila. That seems unnecessary, and said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The staff here knows my preferences, my habits. Precisely, Thomas replied with a cold smile. And a new bride should develop new habits, don't you think? Appropriate to her new position. Before Anne could respond, the door opened and Harrison entered with a tea tray, followed by Eleanor. Here we are, Eleanor said cheerfully, reclaiming her seat. Harrison, pour the tea, please. As Harrison carefully poured the tea, and noticed him glancing between her and Thomas with an unreadable expression. Had he overheard their conversation? How much did he know? "Thank you, Harrison," and said as he handed her a cup, "That will be all." Harrison bowed slightly. "Yes, miss, and—" He hesitated, then added, "If I might mention, miss, I've taken the liberty of having a fire lit in the music room. I thought you might want to practice later, as the weather keeps you indoors," and looked at him in surprise. "Thank you, Harrison. That was thoughtful." A slight smile touched the butler's lips. "My pleasure, miss." With another bow, he left the parlor. Thomas watched Harrison go with narrowed eyes, then turned back to Anne. "You've been practicing your music?" "Of course," Anne replied. "A wife must maintain her accomplishments, mustn't she?" Eleanor beamed, and has been most diligent with her practicing lately. Her playing has improved remarkably. "Indeed," Thomas murmured, his gaze calculating. "I'd love to hear you play again sometime. Perhaps even observe a practice session," and felt a chill at his words. There's nothing interesting about watching someone practice, Thomas. Just endless repetition and many mistakes. Still, he insisted, I find the process fascinating, the way a skill develops under proper guidance. There was no mistaking his emphasis on the last word. He knew something, or at least he suspected. "Perhaps another time," and said lightly, "The storm has given me a headache, and I don't think I do justice to music today." "Of course," Thomas conceded, though his eyes remained suspicious. "Another time." The rest of the visit passed in strained conversation about wedding plans and the merging of the plantations. When Thomas finally departed, promising to return the next day, and felt as if she could breathe again. "He's quite smitten with you," Eleanor observed as they watched his carriage disappear down the drive. "You're a fortunate girl, and—" "Yes, mother," and replied automatically, "Very fortunate." She excused herself and headed for the music room, drawn by the promise of solace at the piano, and perhaps Harrison's discreet support might provide. The music room was warm from the small fire Harrison had indeed lit in the fireplace. The heat was unnecessary on such a muggy day, but Anne understood the gesture for what it was, a signal that this room was being used, that her presence here was expected and unremarkable. She sat at the piano and began to play, her fingers finding the home motif instinctively. As the familiar notes filled the room, she felt some of the tension leave her body. A soft knock at the door interrupted her playing. She looked up, hoping to see Lila, but it was Harrison who entered, carrying a fresh pitcher of water. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss N," he said formally. "I thought you might be thirsty." "Thank you, Harrison," and replied, watching him curiously. The butler had served the Whitlow family for as long as she could remember, but she realized suddenly that she knew very little about him as a person. Harrison set the pitcher on a small table, then hesitated. "If I may speak freely, miss?" and nodded, surprised. "Of course." "The walls in this house have ears," Harrison said quietly, his eyes meeting hers directly for perhaps the first time in her memory. And eyes. One must be cautious about private matters, and felt her heart race. He knew. About her and Lila, about their lessons, about everything. "I don't know what you mean," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. A small, sad smile touched Harrison's lips. "I think you do, miss." He glanced at the door, then back at her. Some doors need to be fully closed, not just mostly closed. "Do you understand?" And swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, I understand." "Good," Harrison said, "because not everyone in this house is discreet." "Are you?" and asked softly. "Discreet?" Harrison's expression softened slightly. "I've served the Whitlow family for 30 years, miss. I've seen many things in that time. Not all of them have needed to be mentioned to your parents." Relief washed over Anne. "Thank you, Harrison." "Don't thank me yet," Harrison warned. "Mr. Avery is suspicious and determined. He's a man who believes he owns whatever he sets his sights on, including me," and said bitterly. Harrison inclined his head slightly. "Unfortunately, yes. What should I do?" And asked, surprising herself with the question. She never sought advice from a servant before. "Be careful," Harrison replied simply. "Both of you." Before Anne could respond, the door opened again, and Eleanor Whitlow swept into the room. "There you are, and," she said, "I've been looking for you. Harrison, that will be all." Harrison bowed and exited silently, leaving and alone with her mother. "I've had a wonderful idea," Eleanor announced, oblivious of the tension in the room. "About your music for the engagement dinner." "Oh," Anne said, trying to focus on her mother's words. "Yes," Eleanor continued, sitting beside and on the piano bench. "You played well the recital, of course, but I was thinking we could make an even greater impression on the Averys." "How?" Anne asked, a sense of foreboding growing in her stomach. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "I've noticed how much better you play when Lila is in the room. It's as if she somehow steadies you." Anne's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't be coy and—" Eleanor said impatiently. "I've observed you. You play differently when she's present, more confidently." "Mother, It's nothing to be embarrassed about," Eleanor interrupted. "Many great musicians have their little superstitions, their rituals for performance." And didn't correct her mother's misunderstanding. It was safer this way. "So what is your idea?" she asked cautiously. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with excitement. "For the engagement dinner, we'll have Lila hidden behind a folding screen next to the piano. She can sit there while you perform, providing whatever calming influence she seems to have on your playing." And stared at her mother in disbelief. "You want to hide Lila behind a screen? Like some sort of talisman?" "If that's how you want to put it, yes," Eleanor confirmed. "No one will see her, of course. It would be our little secret." Our little secret. The words echoed in Anne's mind, taking on a sinister tone. This wasn't about helping her play better. This was about control. Eleanor's way of acknowledging that she knew something was happening between Anne and Lila, and containing it, shaping it to her own purposes. "I don't think that's necessary," Anne said carefully. "I can play well enough on my own now." Eleanor's expression hardened. It wasn't a suggestion, and the engagement dinner must be perfect. The Averys must see you at your absolute best. If having that girl nearby helps your performance, then that's what we'll do. "And what about Lila?" And asked, "Doesn't she have a say in this?" Eleanor laughed, the sound brittle. "A say? She's a slave, and she does as she's told." The words hit and like a physical blow. Of course, she had always known this truth, but hearing it stated so baldly by her mother made her stomach turn. "Now," Eleanor continued, rising from the bench, "I've already spoken to Harrison about setting up the screen. You'll practice with it tomorrow to get accustomed to the arrangement." And nodded numbly, unable to form words. "Good," Eleanor said, patting her shoulder. "Keep practicing. Dinner is at 7. After her mother left, and sat motionless at the piano for a long time, her mind racing. Eleanor knew something was happening between her and Lila. Not the full truth, perhaps, but enough to be dangerous. And now she was using that knowledge to control them both. The storm continued to rage outside, matching the turmoil in Anne's heart. That evening, the household gathered in the dining room for dinner. James Whitlow had returned from another business trip and was full of news about the wedding preparations. "The contracts are nearly ready," he announced as the first course was served. "Thomas and I went over the details this morning before the rain set in. By this time next month, the Whitlow and Avery plantations will be legally joined." "Wonderful news," Eleanor said, beaming at her husband. "And the wedding?" "August 15th, James replied. Thomas was quite insistent on the date, and pushed her food around her plate, her appetite gone. Across the table, her younger brother, William, gave her a sympathetic look. At 18, he was still in school and largely uninvolved in the family business, but he was observant enough to notice Anne's distress. "That doesn't give us much time," Eleanor fretted. "There's so much to prepare." "Thomas has offered to have his own staff handle most of the arrangements," James said. "He wants to ease the burden on you, my dear, and to take control of every aspect of the wedding," and thought bitterly. "How considerate," Eleanor murmured. "And you're very quiet this evening." "Just tired, Mother," Anne replied. "The heat, I suppose." "Well, you should rest after dinner," Eleanor advised. "You need to look your best for Thomas's visit tomorrow." and nodded, though the thought of Thomas's visit filled her with dread. What else would he try to control? What other freedoms would he take from her before they were even married? After dinner, and retreated to her room, declining Mary's offer to help her prepare for bed. She wanted to be alone with her thoughts. But solitude brought no peace. Her mind kept returning to Eleanor's plan for the engagement dinner. Lila hidden behind a screen, a secret presence to steady N's nerves. The wrongness of it burned in her chest. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called. "It's me, William," came her brother's voice. "May I come in?" And opened the door to find William standing there, concern evident on his young face. "What is it?" she asked. William entered and closed the door behind him. "Are you all right, Anne? You seemed upset at dinner," and sighed, touched by her brother's concern. "I'm fine, Will. Just adjusting to the idea of marriage." William studied her face. "You don't want to marry Thomas Avery, do you?" "It doesn't matter what I want," and replied wearily. "The contract are being drawn up. The date is set." "But you're miserable," William insisted. "Anyone with eyes can see that," and managed a small smile. "When did my little brother become so perceptive?" William shrugged. "I notice things. Like how you've been different lately. Happier when you play the piano, but sadder about everything else." And felt a lump form in her throat. "It's complicated, Will." "Because of Lila?" William asked quietly, and his head snapped up. "What?" "I've seen you, too," William explained. "In the music room. She was teaching you to play better, wasn't she?" Relief mixed with anxiety in Anne's chest. William had seen them, but he didn't understand the full truth. Or did he? "Yes," she admitted. "She was helping me practice." William nodded. "I thought so. She's really good at music, isn't she? I've heard her humming when she works." "Yes, she is," and agreed, grateful for her brother's simple acceptance of Lila's talent. "So what's the problem?" William asked. "Why are you sad about it?" And sighed. "Because Thomas Avery doesn't want to have friends like Lila. He wants to control everything about my life." William's young face hardened with surprising maturity. "I don't like him. He looks at people like they're things to be owned." "That's exactly it," and said, surprised by her brother's insight. "And now I'm supposed to marry him in a month." William was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Could you run away?" and gave a sad laugh. "And go where, Will? Do what?" "I have no money of my own, no skills to earn a living." "You could play piano," William suggested, "in a concert hall or something." "I'm not that good," and said gently, "and even if I were, no respectable venue would hire a woman who ran away from her family and her fiancé." William's shoulders slumped. "There has to be something you can do." "I wish there was," and said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "But sometimes we just have to accept the path that's been chosen for us." "That's not fair," William protested. "No," and agreed. "It's not fair at all." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the rain against the windows the only noise in the room. "I should let you rest," William finally said, rising to his feet. "But if there's anything I can do to help, just being my brother helps," and assured him. "Good night, Will," after William left and moved to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked grounds of Whitlow Plantation. Somewhere out there, in one of the small cabins, Lila was probably preparing for bed, her bandaged hands a reminder of the punishment she'd already endured just for helping Anne. How much worse would it be if Eleanor's plan went forward? If Lila was forced to hide behind a screen like some kind of good luck charm? And what if they were discovered? And made a decision then. She wouldn't allow it. She wouldn't let Lila be used that way, wouldn't participate in that kind of deception. The recital would be hers alone, imperfect perhaps, but honest. The next morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. Anne rose early and went directly to the music room, determined to practice on her own before her mother could implement her screen plan. To her surprise, she found Lila already there, dusting the furniture with her bandaged hands. "Lila," and said, closing the door behind her, "Your hands. Should you be working already?" Lila gave a small shrug. They're healing, Miss. And Mrs. Whitlow was specific about me cleaning the music room this morning, and felt a surge of anger toward her mother. Did she tell you about her plan for the engagement dinner? Lila nodded, her expression guarded. Yes, miss. About the screen. And what do you think of it? And asked. Lila kept her eyes on her dusting. It's not my place to have an opinion, miss. Please, and said softly, tell me what you really think. Lila hesitated, then set down her dusting cloth. If they ask me to do that, I won't, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I won't sit behind a screen and pretend I don't exist while you pretend you're playing alone. Good, and said firmly, because I was going to tell them the same thing. I won't do it either. Lila looked up, surprise evident in her eyes. Missin', that could cause trouble for both of us. I don't care, and insisted. It's wrong, Lila. Using you that way, hiding you like you're something shameful. But I am, miss, Lila said gently. In their eyes, I am shameful. A slave teaching a planter's daughter? That's not something they can acknowledge openly. Then they should just let me play on my own, and argued, however imperfect it might be. Lila's expression softened. Your playing is beautiful, miss, and you don't need me anymore. That's not true, and said, stepping closer. I do need you, not for the music, but for... She trailed off, unable to put into words a connection that had grown between them over their lessons. The way Lila's presence steadied her, not just at the piano but in life. The way her smile could light up even the darkest day. For what, miss? Lila prompted softly. Before and could answer, footsteps sounded in the hallway. They sprang apart just as the door opened to reveal Eleanor, followed by Harrison carrying a large folding screen. Ah, perfect, Eleanor said, seeing them both in the music room. You're both here. Harrison, set up the screen beside the piano, please. Harrison moved to position the screen, his face carefully blank. As he worked, he glanced briefly at a question in his eyes. Mother, and began gathering her courage. About this plan. Isn't it clever? Eleanor interrupted. No one will even know Lila is there, but you'll have her, whatever it is she does for your playing, right beside you. That's what I want to discuss, and said, her voice stronger now. I don't think this is appropriate. Eleanor's smile faltered. What do you mean? I mean, and continued, that I don't want to pretend I'm playing better than I am. If I can't perform well on my own, then I shouldn't perform at all. Don't be ridiculous, and Eleanor dismissed. This isn't about pretending. It's about presenting yourself in the best possible light. By hiding Lila behind a screen, and challenged, by making her invisible, Eleanor's expression hardened. She is invisible, and that's her role in this household, to serve without being seen or heard, and felt a surge of anger. That's not true. She's a person, mother, with feelings and talents, and... Enough! Eleanor snapped. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this stops now. You will do as you're told. And so will she. She turned to Lila. You will sit behind this screen during the engagement dinner, and do whatever it is you do to help miss and play. Is that understood? Lila kept her eyes downcast. Yes, ma'am. Good, Eleanor said. She turned back to Anne. Now, practice with the screen in place. I want you comfortable with the arrangement before the dinner. With that, Eleanor swept from the room, leaving Lila and Harrison in uncomfortable silence. Harrison cleared his throat. Will there be anything else, Miss N? And shook her head. No, thank you, Harrison. The butler nodded and left, closing the door behind him. As soon as they were alone, and turned to Lila. I'm so sorry. I thought if I refused... It wouldn't have mattered, Lila interrupted gently. Your mother has made up her mind. You said you wouldn't do it, and reminded her. A sad smile touched Lila's lips. And what choice do I have, missin'? If I refuse, I'll be punished. Maybe sold. The word hung in the air between them, a stark reminder of the reality of Lila's existence. She could be sold away from Whitlow Plantation, from her home, from on nothing more than a whim from the Whitlows. I won't let that happen, Anne said fiercely. You can't stop it, Lila replied, her voice resigned. No more than you can stop your marriage to Thomas Avery. And felt tears burn behind her eyes. There has to be something we can do. Lila shook her head. There isn't, miss. Not in this world. The weight of their situation pressed down on Anne's shoulders. Lila was right. In the world they lived in, neither of them had true freedom to choose their own path. Will you at least help me practice? Anne asked, gesturing toward the piano, not behind the screen. Just like before. Lila hesitated, then nodded. Yes, miss. They moved to the piano, and sitting on the bench while Lila stood beside her, for the next hour, they returned to their lessons, Lila counting the rhythm and playing the notes. The music wrapped around them like a protective bubble, a world of their own creation where, for a little while at least, they could forget the harsh realities waiting outside the music room door. When Anne played a home motif, Lila hummed along softly, the harmony enriching the simple four-note sequence. The sound brought tears to Anne's eyes again, but this time from a bittersweet joy rather than despair. As the final notes faded, Anne looked up at Lila. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Lila's eyes met hers, filled with emotions too complex to name. You're welcome, Miss Anne. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by something deeper than words. Then, reluctantly, Lila stepped back. I should go, she said. I have other duties. Anne nodded, understanding the need to maintain appearances. Will I see you tomorrow? For practice with the screen, Lila confirmed, her tone neutral, as your mother ordered, and watched her go, her heart heavy with the knowledge that their time together was growing short. In a month, she would be married to Thomas Avery and living at his plantation. Lila would remain at Whitlow, or worse, be sold elsewhere. The thought was unbearable. That afternoon, Thomas Avery arrived for his promised visit and received him in the parlor, her mother hovering nearby with transparent excitement about the engagement. And my dear, Thomas greeted her, taking her hand and kissing it. You look lovely today. Thank you, and replied mechanically. You're very kind. Thomas's eyes went to the diamond ring on her finger. I see you're wearing my grandmother's ring. It suits you. It's beautiful. And said, the words automatic and empty. Eleanor beamed at them. Doesn't she look like a proper Avery bride already, Thomas? Indeed she does, Thomas agreed, his eyes assessing it in a way that made her skin crawl. In fact, I was hoping to have a private word with my fiancée, if you wouldn't mind, Mrs. Whitlow. Of course not, Eleanor said, rising from her seat. I'll just see about refreshments. Harrison will bring tea shortly. After Eleanor left, Thomas sat beside and on the sofa, closer than propriety strictly allowed. I've been thinking about you all day, he said, his voice dropping lower. About our future together. Have you? Anne replied, try to sound interested. Yes, Thomas continued. I've already begun preparations at Avery Plantation for your arrival. I'm having the mistress's suite redecorated to suit your tastes. How thoughtful, Anne murmured. Thomas reached out and took her hand. I want you to be happy there, and to feel at home. Home. The word echoed in Anne's mind, bringing with it the memory of the four-note motif, of Lila's harmony, of their shared breath and forehead touch. What is it? Thomas asked, noticing her distraction. You seem far away. Anne forced herself back to the present, just thinking about all the changes ahead. Good changes, Thomas insisted. You'll be mistress of the largest plantation in coastal Georgia. You'll have everything you could possibly want, except freedom and thought, except choice, except love. Speaking of changes, Thomas continued, his tone deceptively casual, I was speaking with your father this morning about the servants you'll bring with you to Avery Plantation. And tensed. Oh, yes, Thomas said. I suggested that it might be easiest if you started fresh with new staff. Your father agreed, especially since many of the house slaves here have been in service to your mother for years and would be difficult to replace. I see, Anne said, her heart sinking. So I'll bring no one with me? Well, I did mention that young maid. Mary, is it? She seems capable enough. And perhaps the butler, Harrison. He runs a tight household, from what I've observed. And nodded, noting the obvious omission. And what about Lila? She's the finest seamstress on the plantation. Thomas's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I have an excellent tailor at Avery Plantation, and several skilled female slaves who can handle any sewing you require. But Lila knows my preferences, and argued she's made most of my gowns. And, Thomas said, his voice taking on a warning tone, I don't think it would be appropriate for that particular slave to join our household. Why not? And challenged, unable to stop herself. Thomas's grip on her hand tightened painfully. Because I've noticed your unusual attachment to her, and I don't approve of it. And tried to pull her hand away, but Thomas held firm. I don't know what you think you've noticed, but... Don't lie to me and... Thomas interrupted, his voice cold. I've seen the way you look at her. The way you rush to her defense at the laundry sheds. The way you speak about her now. Fear clutched at Anne's heart. How much did he know? How much did he suspect? She's a valued servant, and insisted. Nothing more. Thomas's eyes bored into hers. Let's be clear about something, my dear. When we are married, you will be my wife. Your primary loyalty will be to me, not to some slave girl. Whatever friendship you think you have with her ends now. You can't dictate who I can, Thomas cut her off, and I will. In fact, I've already spoken to your father about it, and felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? I suggested that perhaps it would be best if the seamstress were sold before our wedding, Thomas said calmly, as if discussing the weather, to avoid any awkwardness in the transition. You didn't, and whispered, horror washing over her. I did, Thomas confirmed. Your father was reluctant at first. She is apparently quite skilled. But I pointed out that her presence might make it difficult for you to adapt to your new life at Avery Plantation. He saw the wisdom in my suggestion, and felt as if she might be sick. You can't do this. It's already done, Thomas said, releasing her hand at last. The arrangements will be made after the engagement dinner. She'll be sold to a plantation in Alabama, far enough away that you won't be tempted to maintain contact. The room seemed to spin around, and Thomas had orchestrated Lila's removal with calculated precision, using Anne's father's authority to separate them permanently. Why are you doing this? Anne asked, her voice barely audible. Thomas leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. Because whatever steadies your hand, and I'll see it removed. You belong to me now. Only to me. Remember that. Before Anne could respond, the door opened and Harrison entered with a tea tray. The butler's eyes took in the scene, Thomas leaning too close and pale and shaking, and a flicker of concern crossed his normally impassive face. Tea, Miss and Mr. Avery, Harrison announced, setting the tray on the table before them. Thank you, Harrison, and managed to say, grateful for the interruption. As Harrison poured the tea, his steady presence gave Anne a moment to collect herself. Thomas leaned back, his expression smoothly transforming into one of polite interest as Eleanor rejoined them. I hope I haven't kept you waiting too long, Eleanor said as she took her seat. I was just checking on the preparations for the engagement dinner. Not at all, Thomas replied smoothly. Anne and I were having a fascinating discussion about our future household arrangements. Eleanor beamed. How wonderful, and will be such a capable mistress. Thomas, I've trained her well. I'm sure you have, Thomas agreed, accepting a cup of tea from Harrison, and I intend to continue that training. The way he said it sent a chill down Anne's spine. This wasn't a marriage he was planning. It was ownership, pure and simple. As the conversation continued around her, Anne's mind raced. Thomas intended to have Lila sold away immediately after the engagement dinner. She had to warn her, had to find some way to prevent it. But how? Her father had already agreed to the sale. Her mother would certainly support Thomas's decision. She had no money of her own, no power to intervene. She caught Harrison watching her with concern as he served the tea. The butler had proven himself an ally of sorts. Perhaps he could help. But even as the thought formed, and knew it was a desperate one, what could Harrison do against the combined authority of James Whitlow and Thomas Avery? As Thomas and Eleanor discussed wedding details and sipped her tea mechanically, her mind far away in the music room, playing the home motif with Lila at her side, the home they had created together in those brief, stolen moments was about to be destroyed forever, and there seemed to be nothing she could do to stop it. The day of the engagement dinner arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the sweet scent of magnolias in the air. Whitlow Plantation was a flurry of activity as servants polished silver, arranged flowers, and prepared the elaborate meal that would celebrate Anne's engagement to Thomas Avery, and stood at her bedroom window, watching the preparations in the garden below. Tables were being set up on the lawn, draped with fine white linens. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to be lit when evening fell. Everything was beautiful, perfect, and it felt like a prison sentence. "Miss Anne?" Mary's voice came from the doorway. "Your mother sent me to help you dress." Anne turned from the window. "Thank you, Mary. Come in." As Mary laid out the emerald green silk gown Eleanor had chosen for the occasion, and asked casually, "Have you seen Lila today?" Mary nodded. "Yes, miss. She's in the sewing room, making last-minute adjustments to the tablecloths." "How are her hands?" "Better, I think," Mary replied. "The bandages are smaller now," and nodded, relieved that at least Lila's physical wounds were healing. But what about the wounds that would come when she learned she was to be sold away, and still hadn't found a way to warn her? "Your mother also asked me to remind you about the recital," Mary continued as she helped and into her petticoats. "She said the screen is already set up in the music room." And jaw tightened. "Thank you, Mary." As Mary dressed her hair, securing it with pearl pins and emerald clips that matched her gown, and made a decision. She wouldn't go through with Eleanor's deception. She would play alone tonight, honestly and imperfectly, whatever the consequences. When Mary finished and looked at herself in the mirror, the woman who stared back was outwardly perfect, elegantly dressed, beautifully coiffed, every inch the Southern belle about to make an advantageous match. But her eyes told a different story. "Will there be anything else, Miss N?" Mary asked. "No, thank you," and replied. Then, on impulse, she added, "Mary, if you see Lila, would you ask her to come to my room? I need to speak with her about my wedding gown." Mary nodded. "Yes, miss. Right away." After Mary left and paced her room anxiously, she had to warn Lila about Thomas's plan, had to find some way to prevent the sale. But what could she do? She had no money of her own, no authority to countermand her father's decisions. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, hoping it was Lila. But it was Harrison who entered, carrying a small package. "Forgive the intrusion, missin'," the butler said formally. "This was delivered for you," and took the package, puzzled. "Thank you, Harrison." "Who brought it?" "One of Mr. Avery's servants," Harrison replied. "A gift for the occasion, I presume," and nodded, setting the package aside unopened. "Harrison," she said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, miss." If someone wanted to leave Whitlow Plantation, to go north, perhaps, how would they do it? Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "That would be a dangerous undertaking, miss, especially for someone who lacks certain papers. But it would be possible?" And pressed. Harrison was silent for a moment, then said carefully, "There are people who help such travelers, but the journey is perilous, and discovery means severe punishment." "Or death," and added softly. "Yes," Harrison agreed, "or death," and met his gaze directly. How would someone find these helpers? Harrison studied her face, clearly weighing his response. "There are signs," he finally said, "markings that point the way. Trusted people who pass messages." He paused and added, "The cook's nephew works on the docks in Savannah. He knows things," and understood what Harrison was telling her. There was a network, a secret path to freedom, and the cook's nephew was connected to it. "Thank you, Harrison," she said. "That's very educational." A ghost of a smile touched the butler's lips. "I've always believed in the value of education, miss." He glanced at the clock on her mantel. "The first guest will be arriving in an hour. Your mother is expecting you downstairs shortly." "I'll be down soon," and promised, after Harrison left, and quickly opened the desk drawer and took out a small pouch containing her grandmother's brooch. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned outright, not belonging to the family collection. She tucked it into her pocket, hoping it would be enough. Another knock at the door, and this time it was Lila who entered, her eyes downcast as protocol demanded. "Mary said you wanted to see me, missin', about your wedding gown," and rushed forward and closed the door. That was just an excuse. "Lila, I need to tell you something important." Lila looked up, alarmed by Anne's tone. "What is it, miss?" "Thomas is planning to have you sold," and said bluntly, the words tumbling out, "after the engagement dinner tonight, to a plantation in Alabama." The color drained from Lila's face. "Alabama? He knows about us," and continued, "Not everything, perhaps, but enough to see you as a threat. He's convinced my father it's the best." Lila's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I see. You have to leave," and said urgently, "Tonight, during the dinner, when everyone is distracted." "Leave," Lila repeated. "And go where, missin'?" "North," and said, "Harrison told me there are people who can help. The cook's nephew on the docks in Savannah." Lila shook her head slowly. "That's the Underground Railroad, Miss Anne. It's dangerous. Many don't make it, but some do," and insisted. "And it's your only chance. If you stay, you'll be sent to Alabama, and we'll never see each other again." Tears filled Lila's eyes. "And if I'm caught trying to escape, the punishment would be worse than being sold." And took Lila's hands in hers, mindful of the healing burns. "I know I'm asking you to risk everything, but I also know that if anyone can make it, you can." Lila looked down at their joined hands. "What about you?" "I'll be fine," and said, though they both knew it wasn't true, "Eventually. You'll marry Thomas Avery," Lila said softly, "and he'll break your spirit day by day." And couldn't deny it. "Maybe, but knowing you're free would give me strength." Lila was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on their hands. "When would I go?" "Tonight," and repeated, "during the dinner. Everyone will be occupied, and it will be dark." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pouch containing her grandmother's brooch. "Take this. It's gold. You can sell it if you need money." Lila shook her head. "I can't take that, Miss Anne." "Please," and insisted. "I need to know you have something of value, something to help you on your journey." After a moment's hesitation, Lila accepted the pouch and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you. There's something else," and said, "Mother has arranged for you to sit behind a screen during my recital tonight, as if you're some kind of lucky charm." Lila's expression hardened slightly. "Yes," she told me. "I won't do it," and declared, "I'm going to play alone. Honestly, even if it's not perfect." "Missin', that could cause trouble for both of us," Lila warned, "especially now with the sale." "I don't care," and said firmly, "I'm tired of living a lie, of pretending to be something I'm not." Lila looked at her for a long moment, something like pride shining in her eyes. "Then stand by that decision, no matter what happens." "I will," and promised. She squeezed Lila's hands gently. "This isn't goodbye. Not yet. I'll find a way to see you once more before you leave. Miss Anne." "In the music room," and continued, after the recital, "before you go." Lila nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, miss." A knock at the door made them both jump, and Eleanor's voice called, "Are you ready? Guests are beginning to arrive," and quickly released Lila's hands. "Coming, mother." To Lila, she whispered, "Remember, music room, after the recital." Lila nodded and slipped out the back entrance to Anne's room, the one used by servants, and took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts, and opened the main door to face her mother. "You look lovely," Eleanor said approvingly. "The green suits you." Now come, Thomas's parents are already here, and followed her mother downstairs, her mind racing with plans and fears. Would Lila really leave tonight? Would she make it safely to Savannah and beyond? And what would happen to herself when Thomas discovered Lila was gone? In the grand entrance hall, Thomas waited with his parents and a few early guests. His eyes lit up with possessive pride when he saw, and descending the stairs. "My beautiful fiancée," he said, coming forward to take her hand. "You outshine every woman here." "Thank you," and replied automatically, "You're too kind," as more guests arrived, and played her role perfectly, smiling, accepting congratulations, allowing Thomas to guide her from group to group. But her mind was elsewhere, counting the hours until recital, until her final meeting with Lila. Dinner was served at 8, a lavish affair with multiple courses served by silent, efficient servants. And noticed that Lila was not among them, probably preparing for a role behind the screen, or perhaps already packing her few possessions for her escape. As dessert was being served, Eleanor rose and tapped her glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat this evening," and has prepared a musical performance to honor her engagement to Thomas. "If you'll all adjourn to the music room, she'll play for us now." Anne's heart pounded as the guests moved to the music room. Thomas offered his arm, and she took it, feeling as if she were walking to her own execution rather than a simple recital. The music room had been transformed for the occasion. Extra chairs had been brought in to accommodate the guests, and the piano had been positioned to showcase the performer. And there, beside the piano, was the screen, an elaborate Chinese folding screen that would completely hide anyone sitting behind it. As the guests took their seats and caught sight of Lila slipping into the room through a side door, their eyes met briefly, a silent communication passing between them. Then Lila moved behind the screen, invisible to everyone but Anne. Eleanor approached and, beaming with pride, "Everything is ready, my dear. Lila is in position. You'll play beautifully, I'm sure," and took a deep breath. "Mother, there's something I need to tell you." "Not now," and Eleanor said dismissively, "The guests are waiting." Before Anne could protest further, her mother guided her to the piano bench and announced to the room, "My daughter will now play for us a beautiful hymn, which she has practiced diligently for this special occasion." Applause filled the room as Anne sat at the piano, her hands trembling slightly. She looked toward the screen, knowing Lila sat behind it, waiting for her cue. In that moment, and made her final decision. She would not lie, not pretend, not hide the truth any longer. She began to play, her fingers finding the keys without Lila's guidance. The music was imperfect, a missed note here, a hesitation there. But it was honest. It was hers alone. From behind the screen, there was only silence. Lila, true to her word, was not playing along with the deception, and continued through the piece, her confidence growing with each measure. When she reached the home motif, she played it with special care, infusing the 4 simple notes with all the emotion she felt for Lila. As the final chord faded, and looked up to see mixed reactions from the audience. Some seemed pleased, others puzzled by the imperfections in her performance. Thomas was watching her with narrowed eyes, suspicion clear on his face. The guests applauded politely, and then rose from the piano bench, giving a small curtsy as she'd been taught. "Lovely, my dear," Richard Avery said with forced enthusiasm. "Quite spirited." "Indeed," Victoria Avery agreed, though her expression suggested she'd expected better. Thomas approached the piano, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You played differently than I expected, and I thought you had improved more." I played honestly, and replied, meeting his gaze steadily, "As myself." Thomas's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to Anne. His voice dropped so only she could hear. "We'll discuss this later." Eleanor hurried forward, clearly sensing that something had gone wrong. "Wasn't that delightful? Now, let's all return to the garden for coffee and brandy. The evening is so lovely." As the guests filed out, led by Eleanor and James Whitlow, Thomas lingered behind. When the room was empty except for the 3 of them, Thomas, and the still-hidden Lila, he moved to the screen. "Let's see what's behind here, shall we?" he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Thomas, don't," and began, but it was too late. Thomas pulled the screen aside to reveal nothing. Lila was gone. Where is she? Thomas demanded, turning to Anne. Your little helper? I don't know what you mean, Anne said, her heart racing with both fear and relief. Lila must have slipped away during the performance, already beginning her journey to freedom. Thomas grabbed Anne's wrist, his fingers digging painfully into her skin. Don't play games with me, Anne. I know all about your lessons with the seamstress. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Let go of me, Anne said firmly, trying to pull away. No, Thomas said, his voice cold. You need to understand something. You are going to be my wife, my property, and I will not tolerate deception or disobedience. I am not your property, Anne replied, her voice steady despite her fear. And I never will be. Thomas's face darkened with anger. We'll see about that. He released her wrist and stepped back. I'm gonna find that slave girl. And when I do, she'll pay for whatever influence she's had over you. With that threat hanging in the air, Thomas stormed from the room, leaving Anne alone and shaking. She knew she had only minutes before Thomas raised the alarm about Lila's absence. She had to find her, to make sure she was safely away from Whitlow Plantation before the search began. Moving quickly, Anne slipped out of the music room and made her way through the back hallways of the house, avoiding the guests who were now enjoying coffee in the garden. She reached the servants' quarters undetected and hurried toward the small room where Lila slept. The door was ajar, and Anne pushed it open to find the room empty. Lila's few possessions were gone, and the bed was neatly made. On the pillow lay a small piece of paper, the blue silk ribbon Anne had given her, folded into a neat square, and took the ribbon, tucking it into her pocket as tears filled her eyes. Lila was gone. She had made her choice, taken her chance of freedom. It was what Anne had wanted for her, what she had encouraged. So why did it feel like her heart was breaking? A commotion from outside caught her attention. Through the small window, she could see Thomas speaking urgently to the overseer, Jenkins. Men were already mounting horses, preparing to search the plantation grounds, and had to get back to the party before she was missed. She slipped out of Lila's room and hurried through the servants' hallways, emerging near the garden just as Eleanor was beginning to look for her. There you are, Eleanor exclaimed. Where have you been? Thomas is quite upset. I needed a moment alone after the recital, and explained. I was nervous. Eleanor frowned. Well, something strange is happening. The seamstress has disappeared, and Thomas is organizing a search. Disappeared? And repeated, feigning surprise. What do you mean? She's gone, Eleanor said, clearly bewildered. And some men think she may have run away. Can you imagine? After all we've done for her. And bit back the retort that sprang to her lips. Now was not the time to challenge her mother's worldview. How shocking, she said instead. What will happen if they find her? Eleanor's expression hardened. The usual punishment for runaways, though your father might show mercy, given her value as a seamstress, and felt sick at the casual way her mother discussed Lila's potential punishment. I see. Come, Eleanor said, taking Anne's arm. The guests are curious about all the commotion. We need to maintain appearances. And allowed herself to be led back to the garden, where the guests were indeed watching the activity with interest. Thomas had returned and was speaking with James Whitlow, their expressions grave. It seems we have a situation, James announced to the guests. One of our house slaves has run away. I apologize for the disruption to our celebration. Victoria Avery sniffed disapprovingly. Really, James, you should keep better control of your people. Indeed, Richard Avery agreed. It reflects poorly on the management of the plantation. Thomas's eyes found across the garden, his gaze accusatory. She met his look steadily, refusing to show fear or guilt. Perhaps we should conclude the evening, Eleanor suggested. It's growing late, and this unpleasantness has cast a pall over the celebration. The guests murmured agreement, and soon they were making their farewells, collecting wraps and hats, and departing in their carriages. The Averys were the last to leave, with Thomas pulling aside for a final word. I know you had something to do with this, he said, his voice low and threatening. And when I find her, she'll suffer for it. And then, my dear, we will have a reckoning, you and I don't know what you're talking about, and replied calmly, but if Lila has indeed run away, I hope she finds whatever she's looking for. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this defiance, and I promise you that. After the Averys departed, James Whitlow called and into his study. Eleanor was already there, her expression worried. Sit down, and James said, his voice stern. We need to talk about what happened tonight. And sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Yes, Father? Thomas believes you know something about the seamstress's disappearance. James said. Do you? No, Father, and lied. How would I know anything about Lila's plans? Because you spent an unusual amount of time with her lately, Eleanor interjected. The music lessons, the special attention when she was sent to the laundry. I was kind to her, and said, That's all. James studied his daughter's face. Thomas is very upset. He feels this reflects poorly on him, that a slave would run away on the night of his engagement celebration. I'm sorry for his embarrassment, and said, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from her voice. This isn't a joke, and James snapped. The Avery alliance is crucial for this family's future. If Thomas were to break the engagement over this, he won't, and interrupted. He wants the land too much. James looked taken aback by her bluntness. That's beside the point. The fact remains that a valuable piece of property has been lost, and Thomas believes you had something to do with it. I didn't, and insisted. But even if I did, would it matter? Lila belongs to our family, not to Thomas. At least, not yet. That's enough, Eleanor said sharply. You will go to your room and stay there until we decide how to handle this situation. And you will apologize to Thomas tomorrow for your behavior tonight. My behavior? And repeated incredulously. What did I do wrong? I played the piano as requested. I was polite to the guests. I fulfilled every obligation of a proper Southern lady. You played poorly on purpose, Eleanor accused. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. I played honestly and corrected, without pretending to be something I'm not. James sighed heavily. Go to your room, and we'll discuss this further in the morning. And rose, knowing further argument was pointless. Good night, Father, Mother. As she left the study, she heard her parents' voices rise in heated discussion. Let them argue, she thought. Nothing they said or did could change what had happened tonight. Back in her room, and dismissed Mary, preferring to undress herself. As she removed the emerald gown and unpinned her hair, she felt a strange sense of peace despite the chaos of the evening. Lila was gone, hopefully already well on her way to Savannah and beyond. Anne had played honestly, had refused to participate in her mother's deception. Small victories, perhaps, but victories nonetheless. A soft knock at her door startled her. Who is it? She called, quickly pulling on her dressing gown. It's Harrison, miss, came the butler's voice. May I speak with you? And opened the door to find Harrison standing there, his expression grave. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Harrison entered and closed the door behind him. I thought you should know, miss. They haven't found her yet. Relief washed over Anne. Good. Do you think she made it off the plantation? Harrison nodded. The cook's nephew was here earlier, delivering supplies for the dinner. He left with an extra sack of flour that seemed heavier than it should have been, and smiled, understanding what he was telling her. I see. And the search? They're focusing on the wrong direction, Harrison said. Looking toward the river, not toward Savannah. Thank you for telling me, and said, and for everything else. Harrison inclined his head slightly. I've served the Whitlow family for 30 years, miss. In that time, I've learned when to see and when not to see, when to speak and when to remain silent. I'm grateful for your discretion, and said, and your kindness. There's one more thing, Harrison added. Mr. Avery is still here. He insisted on staying to coordinate the search. He's very determined. And smile faded. Of course he is. He can't bear to lose what he considers his property. Be careful, Miss N., Harrison warned. Mr. Avery is not a man who forgets or forgives easily. After Harrison left, and sat by her window, looking out at the night. Lanterns moved across the plantation grounds as the search for Lila continued. But she knew, with a certainty that brought both joy and sadness, that they wouldn't find her. Lila was gone, to freedom, to a new life, to possibilities that had never existed for her at Whitlow Plantation, and would remain behind, facing Thomas Avery's anger and her parents' disappointment. Unable to sleep, and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and slipped out of her room. The house was quiet, most of the servants having retired after the evening's events. She made her way to the music room, drawn there by memories and the need for comfort. The room was dark, lit only by moonlight streaming through the windows. The screen had been removed, the chairs returned to their usual positions. It looked as if the recital had never happened, and sat at the piano and began to play softly, her fingers finding the home motif without thought. The 4 simple notes filled the room, a reminder of everything that had happened there, the lessons, the laughter, the brief moment of connection in a world designed to keep them apart. As the final note faded, a sound from the doorway made her look up, and there, standing in the shadows, was Lila. "You shouldn't be here," and whispered, rising from the piano bench. "The search is looking in all the wrong places." Lila finished for her. "I had to see you one more time," and crossed the room and took Lila's hands in hers. "I thought you'd already left with the cook's nephew." "Not yet," Lila said. "He's waiting for me in the kitchen. We'll leave within the hour." "It's dangerous for you to be here," and insisted. "If they find you—" "I know," Lila interrupted, "but I couldn't go without saying goodbye, without thanking you," and shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. I should be thanking you for the music, for the lessons, for—" She trailed off, unable to put into words all that Lila had given her. "For seeing you," Lila finished softly. "The real you, not the planter's daughter." "Yes," and whispered, "for that most of all." They stood in silence for a moment, hands joined, foreheads almost touching as they had that night during the storm. "I heard you play tonight," Lila finally said. "At the recital, you were beautiful." "I made mistakes," and admitted. "You were honest," Lila corrected. "That's more important than being perfect," and felt tears fill her eyes. "What will happen to you now?" "I'll go north," Lila said. "To Philadelphia, maybe, or Boston. Somewhere I can be free, where I can use my real name." "Your real name?" and repeated, realizing suddenly that she had never asked. A small smile touched Lila's lips. "Eliza. My mother named me Eliza." "Eliza," and echoed, the name feeling right on her tongue. "It suits you. What about you?" "Lila, Eliza asked, what will happen when Thomas realizes I'm gone for good?" and sighed. "He'll be angry. He may try to break the engagement." "Would that be so terrible?" "No," and admitted, "but my parents would never forgive me, and the merger of the plantations would be delayed, not destroyed." Eliza pointed out, "Your father is a businessman. He'll find another way." "Perhaps," and conceded, "but what would I do? Where would I go?" Eliza squeezed her hands gently. "That's for you to decide, and, for the first time in your life, maybe you can choose your own path." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. A life not dictated by her parents or by Thomas Avery. A life of her own making. "I should go," Eliza said reluctantly. "The nephew is waiting, and it's a long journey to Savannah." And nodded, though everything in her wanted to beg Eliza to stay. "Be safe," she whispered. "Be free." "I will," Eliza promised. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "I wrote this for you. Don't read it until I'm gone." And took the paper and tucked it into her dressing gown pocket, next to the blue ribbon. "I'll treasure it." Eliza stepped back, her hands slipping from Anne's grasp. "Goodbye, and Whitlow." "Goodbye, Eliza," and replied, the name still new on her lips. With one last look, Eliza turned and slipped out of the music room, disappearing into the shadows of the hallway, and stood motionless, listening to the soft footsteps fade away. When she was sure Eliza was gone and returned to the piano, she played the home Motif once more, the 4 notes hanging in the air like a prayer. Then she took out the folded paper Eliza had given her and opened it by the moonlight streaming through the window. In careful handwriting, Eliza had written, "Real is better than perfect, and you and Whitlow are real. Remember that. Always play your own music, not the tune others set for you." At the bottom of the page was a simple drawing of a piano keyboard with the 4 notes of their home motif marked, and pressed the paper to her heart, tears streaming down her face. Then she returned to the piano and began to play, not to him from the recital, but a new melody built around the home motif. Her music, not anyone else's. In the kitchen, Eliza heard the faint sound of the piano as she followed the cook's nephew out the back door. The notes followed her into the night, a reminder of what she was leaving behind, but also a promise of what might lie ahead. Freedom, choice, possibility, and somewhere in the distance, a new home waiting to be found. 3 days later, Thomas Avery stormed into Whitlow Plantation, his face dark with fury. The search for Lila had been called off, the trail gone cold. There was no sign of her anywhere in the county. She had help, Thomas insisted, pacing James Whitlow's study. Someone planned this, aided her escape. "We have no evidence of that," James replied calmly. "And regardless, she's gone. There's no point in continuing the search." "No point," Thomas repeated incredulously. "A valuable slave has escaped, potentially encouraging others to do the same. And you say there's no point?" "I've already sent word to neighboring plantations to be on alert," James said. "But the cost of continuing the search outweighs the value of recovering one seamstress." Thomas's jaw tightened. This isn't about the value of the slave. It's about the principle, about maintaining order. "Perhaps," James conceded, "but my decision is final." Thomas turned his attention to Anne, who sat quietly in the corner of the study. "And what do you have to say about all this?" "Nothing," and replied evenly. "As I've told you repeatedly, I know nothing about Lila's escape." "I don't believe you," Thomas said flatly. "And this deception has made me reconsider our engagement." Eleanor, who had been silently observing the exchange, gasped. "Thomas, surely you don't mean—" "I do," Thomas interrupted. "I cannot marry a woman I cannot trust. And has proven herself untrustworthy." James Whitlow rose from his desk, his expression hardening. "Now see here, Avery, we have a contract. The merger of our plantations can proceed without the marriage." Thomas said coldly, "My lawyers will draw up new terms. Less favorable ones, I'm afraid," and felt a strange lightness spreading through her chest. Freedom, not the same kind Eliza had sought, but freedom nonetheless. "I understand," she said, before her father could protest further. "I accept your decision, Thomas." All 3 of them turned to stare at her, Thomas with surprise, Eleanor with horror, James with confusion. "You accept?" Thomas repeated, clearly taken aback by her calm response. "Yes," and said simply, "I think it's for the best. We would not have suited each other well." Thomas's face darkened again. "This isn't about suiting, and this is about your betrayal, your defiance. Call what you will," and replied, "The result is the same. Our engagement is over." For a moment, Thomas seemed at a loss for words. He had clearly expected tears, pleas, perhaps even confession, and composure had thrown him off balance. "Very well," he finally said, his voice cold. "My lawyers will be in touch, Mr. Whitlow. Good day." With that, Thomas stormed from the study, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. "And Elizabeth Whitlow," Eleanor began, her voice shaking with anger. "What have you done?" "Nothing, Mother," and replied truthfully. "I simply accepted Thomas's decision with grace, as you've always taught me to do." "Don't be impertinent," Eleanor snapped. "You've ruined everything. The most advantageous match in the county, destroyed because of your inexplicable attachment to a slave girl. The merger can still proceed," and pointed out, "just not through my marriage." James Whitlow sighed heavily. "Yes, but on Thomas's terms now, not ours. We've lost significant leverage." "I'm sorry for that, Father," and said, and she meant it, she hadn't intended to harm her family's business interests. Perhaps William could. William is too young, James interrupted. And this isn't about finding another way to secure the merger. It's about your behavior and your disregard for this family's interests, and accepted the rebuke silently. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't make the situation worse. Go to your room, Eleanor ordered. Your father and I need to discuss how to salvage this disaster. And rose and left the study, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks despite her parents' anger. As she walked to the hallway, she passed Harrison, who gave her a small, knowing nod, in her room, and sat by the window and took out the folded paper Eliza had given her. She read the words again, feeling their truth resonate in her soul. Play your own music, not the tune others set for you. For the first time in her life, and had the chance to do just that, without Thomas Avery's control, without the immediate pressure of marriage. She had time to think, to plan, to decide what she truly wanted. It wouldn't be easy. Her parents would never fully forgive her for the broken engagement. Society would whisper about her, speculate on what had happened. Her future was uncertain in ways it had never been before. But it was her future, her choice, her music to play, and touch the blue ribbon she now wore hidden in her sleeve, a silent reminder of Eliza and the courage it took to seek freedom. Then she went to her desk and began to write. Not a letter of apology or explanation, but a list of possibilities, of dreams long suppressed, of paths not taken. It was time to find her own way home. Miles away, on a small boat heading north along the coast, Eliza sat huddled under a tarp, hidden from sight. The cook's nephew had delivered her safely to Savannah, where she'd been passed to another helper in the Underground Railroad, and then another. The journey was dangerous, the outcome uncertain. But as the boat rocked gently on the waves, Eliza hummed softly to herself, for simple notes that sounded like home. Not the home she left behind, but the home she was yet to find. A place where she could be Eliza, not Lila, where she could use her gift for music freely, without hiding behind screens or pretending not to exist. In her pocket, she carried Ann's grandmother's brooch, insurance against hard times ahead. And in her heart, she carried a memory of a young woman who had dared to play imperfectly but honestly, who had chosen truth over expectation. The boat continued north, carrying Eliza toward freedom, and back at Whitlow Plantation, and sat at her desk, planning her own kind of freedom. Two women, separated by circumstance but connected by music, by courage, by for simple notes that would always sound like home. Imperfect, true, the final note hanging, and both women still standing.